Welcome to Momentum Magnet, a podcast to inspire your growth. I'm Karen Morales, and your host in helping you find ways to make positive changes for your business, health, relationships, and life. We always have a path to a happier ending, so let's get started today. Hi, and happy Friday. Today, we are diving into a topic that has been at the front of everybody's minds this week, and it's really about leadership. What does leadership mean? How are you able to guide people in your community, in your lives, or in this country through change and growth? And what are those qualities that make up a resilient leader? Today, I am so happy to have Mercier here to talk to us about this really important topic. Michelle is a business strategy coach and the founder of the Surviving Entrepreneurship community. She's also the host of the Resilient Entrepreneur podcast, which debuted on iTunes at number 15 in the entrepreneur category and cracked the top 100 in other countries around the globe. She has 20 years of corporate and professional experience on a wide range of businesses, from nationally acclaimed nonprofits to major corporations like PayPal. Today, I am sure that by the end of this hour, you're going to have some great strategies and some guiding principles to understand what do you do in times of chaos? How do you lead your team through challenging weeks like the one we've just had? And how do you ensure that your leadership style is one that resonates across all audiences? Welcome, Michelle. It could not be a better week to have you here.
Thank you. I know, it's just what a crazy one. I think that's like the G-rated version of what I can say about this week.
I agree. And for anybody listening later, we are actually recording this on the Friday of election week in the United States. And if you've been following any of the news of 2020, you know what an interesting set of events have transpired this week, which makes our conversation all the more timely. So let's talk a little bit about your background and how you have become a coach that really helps executives create better strategies for being resilient and powerful leaders.
Yeah, I mean, my background is very broad. Like you said, like I've worked with a lot of different people across all different walks of life. I'm a big believer that I don't really care about your title. I care about you as a person. So whether, you're a janitor at a company or you're a CEO, I tend to view everybody the same. And I think that is because my background is so diverse, whether, I came from the arts 20 years ago. So hustling that way with an agent and, really, hustling for your worth and stuff like that in that realm. But then, I went through the nonprofit sector, did a lot of work there. And as we know, sometimes there's no budget, but a whole lot of heart in that area of things as well. And then jumped ship into, the corporate sector for a decade. And I saw all sorts of things, some of them, the best teachers sometimes with things that you would not do. So I found that extremely valuable, a lot of it. And then I parlayed that into the business that you see today. So a lot of different experiences, whether it's operations, marketing, tech, leadership, I could go on, which is where I landed from like the business strategy standpoint, because I have the ability to take that 50,000 foot view level over things. But I also understand what it takes to execute in the tactical approach as well. So that's a little bit about how I got here today.
That's beautiful. So I think we find that often, right? When people have a wide background, when they've done a lot of roles and they've experienced working in a lot of different environments, they tend to come to situations with a more global perspective, which sometimes better perspective gives you, more ability to influence. So can you talk a little bit about how you see leadership? What is your philosophy? What is your definition? And then we'll dive into some of the best practices from there.
Yeah. So, first and foremost, I was speaking to somebody the other day about leadership and the, different concepts and our beliefs around it. And first and foremost, my number one thing to say is it's not about you. So as leaders, sometimes you see that there is
It's
this
actually
divide.
called narcissism when it's about you.
Exactly. No shit. Can I swear? No
It's a
shit.
different definition, and it's a whole different episode with somebody with a medical degree. But okay,
Right. And I'm a big fan of servant leadership, and the fact of, for years, I saw the classic, leaders are up top on the point of the pyramid and everybody else is below and shit rolls downhill and like those types of sentiments. And I always thought I was a weirdo because I didn't agree with it. And I, took motivating my teams very seriously. I took getting to know the humans on my teams very seriously, which was somewhat the opposite in a lot of situations that I saw. So the older I got and the more situations that I went through, that mentality of it's not about me, it's to serve the greater good. Also, that comes from, when shit hits the fan and there's a problem, that is the same sentiment around it's not about the blame, it's about solving the problem, and then fixing it on the back end. So similar sentiments in that first and foremost, it's not about you. And if you're a leader and you're saying, well, I'm the head and I'm the vision, great, high five. How are you going to get shit done without your team buying into that vision? How are you going to get things done and motivate people if you don't understand what is motivating them? I would say, when I'm working with leaders and entrepreneurs and all these people, and what always amazes me is when, especially if they have an employee who is troublesome or not getting what they need done or whatever that may be, or they're having a hard time with, the first question out of my mouth is, well, what motivates that person? Have you asked them? Because I think sometimes as leaders, we'll assume, it's money that motivates them. It's this, it's that. And if you do not understand that person as a human being, how the hell are you going to lead them?
That's the same in a personal relationship, yes. Right? If you follow the 5 love languages, yep. You could do the dishes for someone, and if their love language is a hug, it's not going to do anything. Exactly. I think the same is in the professional setting. I mean, not giving the hugs or doing it maybe in the professional setting, but the same idea. What I thought was really interesting in that you just said, and I think it really has been showcased in the United States over the course of the last few months, is that you really are only as effective as the people that are behind you. And usually you motivate for a collective cause and a purpose. And you could even argue that some of the political interesting activities that are happening in the United States are because Trump's been able to do just that, motivate people to get behind him no matter what happens. I mean, there's a line of morality on whether you think that's good or bad or evil, but it is the same premise that marketing starts with solving the needs of your customers, and leadership within an organization means getting everyone to rally around a collective goal.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. I mean, and it doesn't matter which side of the election that you land on, but I mean, for me, I'm not a fan of Trump from a morality standpoint. Not a fan is probably an understatement, but but purely from a marketing standpoint, purely from a PR standpoint, and all of those aspects, some of the stuff is genius. And I want to throw up when I say that a little bit, but at the same time, like you said, he is winning, and he, has won before because he is good at spinning the story. He is good at rallying the people around a common, solve or whatever it may be, and whether that's his team of people around him or actually him doing it, there are kind of standard things in there that I go, oh, damn, that's smart. Maybe well, I mean, not moral, but smart.
I know. I mean, the number one marketing principle is you solve a pain point for your audience. Mm-hmm. And if the pain point that he is solving is people feeling powerlessness, and he's presenting his movement as the recipe for success to prevent that from happening again, you can see why he has had so much success for not only being a leader, but having people take it to the extreme where they paint their car.
Yeah.
With his
he's
name.
Created a brand. He's created an unstoppable brand. And I think, that's where traditional politics has fallen short in the past, except Obama. Obama did quite a bit of that with the grassroots marketing and a lot of that stuff too, and in house parties and like different ways of going about it, especially with the social media and all that stuff. But, even if we translate what Trump's done into, the marketplace of business, I mean, how many, like Apple, cult following, because they've solved so many problems, right? So I think, again, to your point, there is that moral line, right? There's a morality. And unfortunately, we're dealing with humans who have the ability to choose which side of the morality spectrum that they fall on. But from a branding standpoint, to your point, the what's in it for them standpoint, from the audience looking in, it's pretty brilliant and a pretty well-oiled machine, because you see people, calling the shots before they even happen, because it's a playbook at this point, but it's still working.
Right. And I read something really interesting this week that changed the way I think about it. And, people are usually self-motivated beyond anything else. So if you were to take and synthesize the right now RNC versus DNC positioning, you would look at the RNC being about my personal freedom. You would look at the DNC being about collective justice.
Yeah.
So you can see with that singularity of the view about me, why potentially it has somehow in many ways had deeper nails to stick into the people that are believing of that methodology and choosing it as the only path forward, because it's very personal. Now, we've gotten more personal in the last, I think, 6 months when Donald Trump kind of became the enemy, and therefore there was something to fight against, because fighting against evil also, right?
Yes.
Gives a campaign momentum. You need an enemy, right? Every good story has an enemy.
Absolutely.
And usually, and in your great example of Apple, the enemy was those big mainframe computers that were sexy and that were not sexy and hard to understand and not creatively driven.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. When I was going through grad school, and, it was very nonprofit based, but part of the education was lobbying. Part of the education was dealing with governments and, trying to pass different legislature because it's nonprofit in the arts and different things like that. And I remember this brilliant professor saying to me, whether you're asking for money, whether you are marketing a product, whatever it should be, the first question that you should be asking yourself is, put yourself in the audience shoes or in the buyer or the donor's shoes and say, where's the what's in it for me factor, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to be like a selfish thing or, whatever that is, but it's true. Whether it's a pain point, like you said, whether it's I feel like I'm not seen, which I'd say 99% of the issues that happen in this world come down to, I feel like I'm not enough and not seen, in those buckets of things. But to circle back from a leadership perspective, there's a very fine line between capitalizing on that and manipulating people's feelings when it comes to that, and, actually having a moral compass to be able to do it in a way that, benefits those people genuinely. So I think that's, as a leader, it is your moral obligation to walk that very fine line, and then surround yourself by people who will check you if you go right or left, depending on where it is. And two, check yourself and check in with yourself and say, is what I'm doing moral? And I think the trouble is with certain leaders is they don't see a problem with certain things. The line has become skewed. It's become grayed out. And people are no longer human beings in some aspect.
I always see it as when you are driving your movement forward because you're capitalizing on their greatest fear, the response to fear is usually anger. Yep, so you see a lot of these really heightened emotions, and you see a lot of these big feelings and almost scary, angry outbursts because the fear is the underlying driver.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this a lot, and especially like I've had clients say it too, ones who run, restaurants or, breweries or whatever, and those who are dealing with customers, that people are angry, and then you end up with a misplaced anger, right? So from fear, you have fear-based decision making that's coming into play. And you see that a lot in companies that are dealing with layoffs and people are vying for roles. And there's that, kind of, just that instinctual, go forward in the fear-based decision making. But also, there's a lot of mismanaged emotions happening too. And that doesn't mean that some of them aren't justified. That doesn't mean that you're not entitled to those emotions, but it does mean as a human being that you have the ability to choose where you put the actions behind those emotions. And I think to your point, when that veil is kind of dropped and you're given permission to misplace that anger or put it wherever, you want, that's when we run into a problem, because you've kind of removed the boundaries and the respect that was in the mix prior to this. Does that make sense?
That completely makes sense. So let's use a scenario. Let's think about leaders that today are managing a workforce that is facing a lot of change, a lot of turmoil, a lot of big feelings, a lot of fear. As a leader of an organization in that moment of time, how do they successfully bring their team to a place where they de-escalate the big emotions and they create a path forward for collective action and a peaceful transfer to the next step?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think many leaders tend to see everybody as having the same reaction across the board. And everybody has kind of the same profile across the board, which is not true. I mean, just from a basic kind of change management standpoint, people tend to fall into different categories of how they will react, whether they're the critic, whether they go into victim mode, whether they're kind of the bystander who just watches things, whether they're the person who jumps in and expertly navigates it. So I think as a leader, you have to recognize that you are dealing with individual personalities and individual people who will fall into some different categories, and you need to approach those categories differently. And I understand, I can hear somebody say, well, I run a team of 40, 50 people. How am I supposed to do that? Well, there are different ways, right? If you put people in categories, if you have transparency in your communication, if, again, you're treating people like people and not numbers, within your organization, then you can have the heartfelt, transparent conversations that you need to have. But first, you need to identify and understand how they are reacting on somewhat of an individualized level. And second, you need to actually shut your mouth and listen, because I've seen too many leaders come out, they make these big speeches and they, I'm done, that's my job, I'm motivated, I'm good. No. This is an ever-changing thing that we're living in, especially in 2020. And I've spoken to many leaders who have had to lead through this craziness while feeling, myself included, while feeling their own feelings, right? So, and I think there's also this aspect of you don't complain down, okay? If you are a leader, you can have authenticity. You can, listen intently and care about your people. But the minute, at least this is me personally, the minute that you break that barrier and start complaining down the chain, you lose your foothold, you start to scare people, which we see a lot right now in that fear, coming full circle to that fear conversation. As a leader, there has to be respect for the fact that people, the crowd mentality that goes into the fear stuff that comes out with people. And if you aren't picking and choosing your words carefully, per se, and respecting everybody else's ability to process information as well, it's a slippery slope where you could end up kind of with a revolt and with a lot of anger on your hands. Does that make sense?
It does. How would you go about segmenting your team members into different buckets so you understand what the key drivers are? I believe you're saying you want to listen first. So perhaps walk us through what an ideal process would look like.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this depends on the size of your team, right? Obviously, in the multiple levels and things like that. However, I mean, I would take some time. Number one, you should have, this is with the assumption that you already know what makes your people tick, which I hope that you do. But if you don't, that's a whole other conversation. But, just the first things first is you need to be setting up, if you have the time to sit down with these people, even if it's 15 minutes and say, this is hard, give me your 2 cents on how you're doing. It's not rocket science. Like, it's just saying, hey, I see you. Tell me how I can help you, right? Or tell me what you're dealing with. Or tell me, how are you feeling in this time of change? And again, it doesn't become a therapy session, guys. It doesn't become anything crazy like that. You time box it. You make sure that you're, keeping the boundaries there. But it could take 15 minutes to say, how are you doing? And then, I'm a big data person. So once I get all the information from the people across my team, I can sit down and go, okay, maybe I can put some sort of people in kind of the victim mentality, some sort of people in this, and kind of bucket them into where people are at so that I can best motivate going forward and best strategize on how to get shit done. Because let's be honest, all of this stuff is swirling around us, but as leaders or as just employees at a company, there's still an expectation that business needs to move forward. So
it is important. I've worked with clients before that have had massive amounts of attrition, so turnover within their employee base, and they keep thinking they need to hire the right person.
No, it's not that.
No, it's not. And as a consultant, there's been many times where I've had to go to the client and say, it's actually the system. Yeah. You can drop any person into this equation and they're going to have a similar reaction if they're good.
Yeah.
Because chaos breeds dissatisfaction. And until you create a better system, you're not going to be able to find the right employee to move you forward. Because it's going to have to be someone who likes to operate in swirl, and your best employees won't.
No, and I think you have to be able to respect that. And I think you have to and this is where they fall short, is they don't want to take the time to do it because time is money in their mind, right? So it's easier to spin up a new body who maybe can deal with the chaos in the short term to keep production going rather than investing in the steps necessary to, solidify your structure, to approach people as human beings and, cut that turnover. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm more of the person who looks at something as a marathon, not a sprint. So if you're gonna give me the choice of whether or not to just be kind of doing the turnover, but still getting stuff done, because that happens quite often, I'm still gonna pick the quality over quantity when it comes to that solution. I'm still going to pick, solidify your roots as a company, get those processes, down, value your employees, and then move forward with a quality product, because in the long term, that's going to make you stronger, at least in my opinion.
I agree. So if you've heard and you're sitting here and you've heard about some of the structures you can put into place for a leader navigating change, that's really important. But let's talk about how you look in the mirror as a professional, as someone that is a steward of a business, or if you're not a business owner or not working at this moment, there's probably something that you're overseeing. Maybe it's homeschooling. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's your extended family. How can people take a look at the mirror and understand what are 3 qualities of leadership that I should be practicing in my daily life?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first one that pops into my mind has to do with control. I think I've spoken to so many business owners, so many parents, so many people who their first inclination, and I completely understand because it's mine too in some aspects, when shit starts to hit the fan and things get too crazy and it's too overwhelming, is to try to control everything around them, regardless if it's within their ability to control it. So early on, when the pandemic started and everything got crazy, I have 2 little ones, plus a business to run, plus a husband that's working full time. So, and we've been through a lot as a family. So one of the things I've learned time and time again, from a leadership perspective, from a mom perspective, wherever you want to look at it, is to focus on what I can control. Because the minute I try to focus and control things that are not within mine to control is when things go wrong. Right? And when I spin out, quite frankly, because, you're setting yourself up for failure there. So, and from a leadership perspective, you can control, how you tell people to do things. You can control, what comes out of your mouth as an action item or whatever it may be. You cannot control the person on the other end. control is not the way that you want to go. Motivation, potentially, but not controlling them, which I think becomes a really gray area. So, I mean, I think that would be, my top one to tell people, I think right now dealing with that. And then, again, going back to it's not necessarily about you, but on that same level as a leader, as cliche as it is, a leader, again, a parent, whatever it may be, if you're not functioning, they're not functioning. So it's not about you, but actually in some levels, you still need to make sure that you are showing up and putting forth your best foot forward. So, and I find a lot of, because I work a lot with women, that whole like self-care isn't selfish mentality. But the way that I justify that is, taking care of yourself is a business strategy, quite frankly, because if you don't, you're not showing up to homeschool your kids, you're not showing up to lead your company, and you're sure as hell not showing up for 5-10 years down the line as a leader, so, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
I agree with you because I learned that lesson really early on from two very perceptive empaths that are my two little ones.
Mm-hmm.
And from a very early age, even in their 3s and 4s, some days they would come to me. I wouldn't be speaking, but they would just feel something was wrong. And they would say, "What's wrong? Why do you feel different?"
Yeah.
And I had to learn, and I mean, it's a lifelong process, that the energy that I brought into the room impacted, especially my older child's.
Yep.
He was a hard little one. And I got the best advice from a parenting coach years ago who said, you have to control the energy you bring into the room.
Yeah, control. There you go.
And when you're able to take that frustration and push it out of your body, he will de-escalate his mood. And I think a lot of leaders don't always remember that even if it's not being said, it can be felt.
Yes. Absolutely. I think, then there's science behind that, right? Especially if you're a speaker or whatnot, open body language, all of those sorts of things, right? Because we are people and we do read the signs of that stuff. So if I'm going to come at you with my arms crossed and my brow furrowed, then I'm going to say no, I'm not stressed and I'm not unhappy. Come on, people aren't idiots. So neither are your kids, to your point. And it's a hard thing because again, you're dealing with stress too. And that's where that focusing on what you can control, to your point, it's the emotions you bring to the table and being able to kind of take care of yourself to get yourself under control in order to show up. Those two things go hand in hand, in my opinion.
I agree. I think one of the reasons that both you and I have maybe had, we've had a different perspective through this 2020 crisis is because we both faced some pretty major challenges throughout our life. So not only as leaders in our own organizations or in our homes with our kids, the idea of navigating through change and crisis and being resilient is part of our DNA.
Agreed.
So can you talk a little bit about what you think about resilience and the path you took to have learned experiences getting there?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You and I both we are veterans when it comes to that stuff. So, for me personally, going way back, I grew up in chaos. So I weathered a lot of stuff that people maybe didn't typically weather, or at least they don't typically talk about weathering, we'll say, in my early years. But fast forwarding just to the last 7 to 10 years, I've built my business, and with 2 kids with severe medical issues, myself with some pretty severe medical diagnoses there too. I started when I had my first son, I was running the PayPal Europe kind of operations team, and I was on a plane back and forth, and it was insane hours. And, my oldest had a seizure. Which is something as a parent is never going to leave your mind ever. And that started us on a leg, the first leg of many journeys health-wise for my children. And by the time the second one came around, he came with his own litany of stuff. And, things get put in perspective real fast. So I left the corporate space. One, my team was outsourced on some levels and I was laid off, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me because one, I wouldn't have kept a job in the tech industry because of so many hospital visits and so many things. And two, it allowed me to actually go through the emotions and through all the shit that comes along with, two sick kids and, my own sicknesses that came behind that. I'm on my fourth autoimmune disease right now. So for folks out there who think your emotions don't impact your health, I'm kind of a walking billboard for that. But and I built my businesses alongside doing that. So I think for me, when the pandemic hit, not to say that it wasn't hard, not to say that it was not like, hell on earth, especially for the first couple of weeks, juggling everybody and everything and clients going nuts and everything. But I think as a family over here, and for me, I'm a big believer that, resilience is like a muscle, and the more you work it, the stronger it gets. So over here, did we have our bumps? Yeah. But at the same time, we're kind of a well-oiled machine when it comes to dealing with crap and craziness over here, but in a healthy way, not in a, I'm so used to the chaos that I can't live without it, which I'm interested to see how people function after this for that exact reason. But, going back to the fact that it's a muscle, the more you use it, unfortunately, the stronger it gets. And the more you realize that, at least this is my take on it, is the happiness, the joy, the good days, it is impossible for them to exist without the bad ones. Period. It's a yin and a yang. I've always been a believer of, you wouldn't know how sweet it is on a good day if you didn't have the shitty ones next to it to compare it to. So I've just kind of learned over the years that it doesn't matter how hard it is in the moment, because that moment's going to end, and we don't know the outcome of the moment. We don't know what would be on the other side of the moment, but one guarantee is it's going to end, right? And something else is coming behind it. And that's kind of been our view as a family, and we're very conscious and purposeful in infusing joy in our lives. Because sometimes you get so mired down by all the crap that you forget, oh, wait, laughing is fun. And kids are good reminders of that anyway. But I think sometimes as adults, we need to plan that into our way of being, especially when the time gets really tough and hard.
Yeah, it's been a good reminder here to look for ways to inject that joy. I think a lot of my previous coping mechanisms, because I've also dealt with a lot of turmoil and change, was to escape. My number one sort of self-soother was to put the three of us on a plane and go somewhere fabulous. I mean, I always had my next place, my next escape booked. This has been a really interesting process for me. I mean, I was on a plane every single month in 2019.
Wow.
And this year has been nothing. So trying to go back to the simple joys and the simple pleasures and not looking for these more grandiose things, but finding joy in a board game or a game of trivia or a painting lesson on YouTube or cooking a dinner that maybe is terrible and nobody likes and laughing about it has been interesting and a relief at the same time.
Yeah.
A lot of people had challenging moments through the pandemic. I mean, it was hard. I mean, I took it to a new level and broke both of my feet and tore my MCL.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So I'm like, not only am I stuck in the house, I can't walk, but there's a benefit, right? The entire world is online. I don't have to get anyone to school. Yeah. There is none. We're not missing a trip and we're just home. So it was, a blessing and a funny moment that it's probably the best time that you could ever do that.
Right. And I think to take it back to leadership too, I think what people as leaders need to realize as well is, number one, like you said it, is our typical coping mechanisms on a lot of levels have been taken away, especially in the early days of lockdown. Like you said, like you can't just up and go, right? Because it's, fight, flight, or freeze, right? Like we were forced to freeze on some levels. So when you're looking at people who are freaking out, from my perspective as a coach and a consultant, what I've looked at people and I've said, okay, well, what's the root cause of this freak out, right? Like, let's get down to it. But also like, how are you, coping with it? And what was your normal way of coping before? And if that's not available to you, it doesn't mean like it just magically goes away. Like you still have to cope with it. So it means putting other ways and learning other ways. But I think, change is hard for people in general. So when you all of a sudden you're saying, no, you actually can't use that thing that you've used for 20 years to cope, find something different, that's going to take a while, right? And to your point, I think a lot of people are remembering those simple pleasures. And they're remembering that like, oh, I can find just as much joy in a board game as I can, to your point, flying across the world. I don't know, not quite as much joy, but I'll take the beach and the margaritas.
I did a great job trying. I have gone down trying. I do like the new worldwide sensation Among Us and telling my kids they're sus. I think that's a fun little game. So I've gotten into that. But what has been the biggest challenge for you personally? I know when I think about the last, 9 months, there's been a lot of curveballs, but the one that resonates with me the most is that there is no compartmentalizing your life. There are no lines.
Nope.
So for me, I find that sometimes I go through periods where it feels like I do not have a moment to breathe. There isn't any dead space because your ability to parent and homeschool and work on the house and work yourself is all encompassing and there are no stopping points.
No, there are not. I think that is my biggest challenge as well. I mean, I'm a big proponent and I teach clients and I give talks on work-life integration, right? I've never been a fan of work-life balance, that term, because it puts like black and white thinking in the mix. You're either in balance or you're out. Not to mention, as a coach, you tend to look at life as a pie chart and work is one sliver of that pie. And I could never wrap my head around balancing the sliver with the entire pie when it came to that. But I think, in regards to kind of, juggling all of those things, I would say that the hardest thing has been exactly what you said, either not having the time or being very conscious of completely not losing my own identity in doing all of it. Because, like you said, your mom 1 minute, and within the same minute, you're getting on a client call. And in the same next minute, you're back to handling everyone's emotions in the household. And it's a lot. It is a lot to deal with. And I think the best tool that I've used is to, one, surround myself with people, that I can talk to that will remind me that it's a lot and that the expectations are completely unrealistic, because that way I can turn to myself and allow some grace and space to mess it up. I'm not saying it's easy when I do, and I'm definitely not saying it's guilt-free, because I would say there has not been a day since all of this started where I haven't felt like I was either failing as a mom, failing as a business owner, failing as a coach. Like there's been some aspect of, you can only slice the pie, meaning me, so many ways. However, go ahead.
7 cycle of, doing things leads to exhaustion. And then I think that exhaustion, I have found myself, even though I'm not really going anywhere, right? I'm in this house, often sometimes for days on end. And I find myself on some weekends just exhausted, just spent. And I think it's because of the emotional pressure that exists almost 24/7. From the time you get up in the morning, somebody needs you. Till the time you go to bed.
Snacks. Always snacks.
Yeah,
yep.
Always snacks. Always some crazy new form of math that I've never seen before in my life. And I have to phone a friend. The amount of phoning a friend I've done for Common Core math in the last 6 months has been a lot.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because my two are in a very small school. So they actually went back in person. Please don't hate me, everyone who's listening, in the fall. But what I found was I'm still so tightly wound that the ability to focus is not necessarily like it used to be, because I'm so used to multitasking on steroids, basically, that when I no longer have to completely do it, which, don't get me wrong, I'm still working 40 plus hours in a window that is, 9 to 3, so it's still cut in half. But I think what we're going to see is a lot of people when they come out of this, the backlash of the last 6 months is going to be quite substantial. I'm not a psychologist, but the backlash and the exhaustion. I had a functional doctor the other day say to me that they're starting to see, especially in their female clients, a lot of things pop up because we've been holding it together for so long and neglecting ourselves potentially, that your body can only do it for so long. But in terms of what I tell clients and what I tell people to do is, I think you really need to go for quality over quantity when it comes to the self-care stuff. So 15 minutes, even if you get that like a day for yourself, like really zone in on the quality of what you're doing in those 15 minutes, rather than what we used to have was like 2 hours of no kids and no interruptions and stuff like that. So, easier said than done on a bad day, but,
what do you think is going to happen to our way of working when this is officially over? How do you think the fabric of work-life balance and of corporate America has changed? I know that my neighbor's husband works for a large company, and he's a corporate lawyer, and he received the memo yesterday that he will never have an office again, full stop. He's returned to home forever.
It's like an extrovert's nightmare.
On
some level.
He's going to do it. He's not thrilled. So what's going to happen?
Well, I think there's so many different things. I would hope, like in this dream world, that everyone gets that work-life integration thing in their head, right? That things aren't in like nice, neat boxes anymore, especially with technology in the mix. That being said, we're going to need a lot of training and boundary setting when it comes to that. And then, just on the flip side of things too, it was interesting. I had a male friend telling me that his boss was giving him shit because his kids were in the background and, stuff like that. And I said that to a couple female friends, and they were like, well, welcome to our world, so it's going to be, from the female versus male perspective, it's going to be really interesting because you don't have a choice. Either that or the women are going to get hit and we're going to see a big step back.
I've seen the opposite in most of my calls. I worked with a venture firm, and they actually did talent show meetings where everybody had their kids perform in weekly status meetings. So
how amazing is that?
Yeah, they could feel the integration. And then, I've had to put my camera on mute and unmute and say, I can't talk right now. There's a PE class happening in the next room. I don't know what to say. I've had inappropriate things happen, and I was just dealing with a celebrity
life.
Right.
That's life. And I think that's where I think we were very fortunate to have the playing field evened for us, right? Like in regards to that. And I think my fear is that it's going to become uneven, and people are so used to this that, you
mean they're going to go back to how we used to work and expect people not to blend in anymore. And it's going to become,
and it wasn't doable before. And now that we've kind of seen what it can be and noticed what we're capable of, number one, real estate. I'm sorry if you own a gigantic office building, yikes. But, and two, we can't go backwards. We cannot, this is again, my opinion, we cannot just all of a sudden flip the switch and go back to splitting things up. Because to your point, how much happier, I wonder, were those workplaces when those parents could actually showcase their kids and understand what everybody else's life was like. It becomes a human experience.
It's as if the rest of the world is now experiencing what you and I did when we created our own companies.
Yes.
Both of us did it because we had children with special needs, and we had health conditions ourselves. And we knew that separation of life and work was untenable. It wasn't going to happen ever again. Mm-hmm. I was blessed because in a lot of the moments that my son was in and out of the hospital, I had a beautiful, wonderful boss who understood. And there were many moments. I called her from Children's Hospital at 6:30 in the morning and said, the presentation I'm supposed to do to Europe in an hour, I'm in the ER. And she's like, okay, send it to me. I'll wing it. I got it.
And you were very fortunate to have that.
Fortunate.
Huge. The fact that that's a rarity is sad.
And I had a managing director of a global ad agency when I had a child in a hospital. I was supposed to go on a 2-week business trip to LA. This man hadn't gone on a TV shoot in like 10 years.
Yeah.
And he's like, "You're not going. I'm not going to I'm going to go." He's like, "You got to tell me what I need to do, but I'm going to get on that plane because you can't have your family right now," which is beautiful. But a lot of people don't have that luxury.
No, it's funny when I used to work in corporate, we did a lot of we were enterprise level email marketing, right? So Black Friday, huge for us. Like, you know, I hadn't experienced a Thanksgiving that I wasn't working in like years until I stepped out of that. But it was funny. I had one manager in particular who used to joke and say, like, "We're not curing cancer here, guys. Like, we're sending emails." Like, so, and it puts it in perspective, and it seems like such a simple thing. And I know some people are probably listening saying like easier said than done because my livelihood depends on it. But get your priorities in check on some levels, guys. Like for me, and like you were saying before, because the two of us were forced into that kind of blend of a situation, you know, my priorities now are me, my family, my company, like in that order. So, and if it doesn't align with one of those things, then it's got to go. Like, and I don't mean to sound so black and white on that, but that's kind of the truth. The older you get, you really have to understand what your priorities are. And if your priorities are your family is above your work, or sometimes that can be blurred because you need the money to pay for the family and blah, blah, blah. Like I get it. But at the end of the day, I think some of us are realizing that we can do with less. We can live a simpler life. And, you know, the reality of the life that we're living with two parents, a lot of the household, two parents working, is that there has to be a blend. And we should settle for nothing less, quite frankly, at this point.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I mean, I do feel that change is moving in the right direction for work-life balance. Yeah. I've seen specifically in Gen X and Gen Z, there is not a lot of tolerance for fixed work environments, for structured process, for hierarchical order for the purpose of historical norms. Like they're not about it. No, get on TikTok and you'll be entertained.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that goes to leadership too. Like you can't put your leader on a pedestal somewhere and have them be unreachable and you know, on the flip side of that, they're not perfect either. And they have families and they have lives and they have things that they have to caretake for too. So it almost takes a little bit of that pressure of separation and like loneliness at the top mentality away too, because at the end of the day, we're just people. And to your point, the younger generations aren't going to deal with that shit.
And I'm hoping it breeds a more equal environment, because I know there were some people that I worked with over the years in big agencies, in big, you know, ad networks, and they didn't have children and they felt like they had less of an ability to ask for flexibility, even when they had a personal need or norm. They were a marathon runner. They did ultras. They wanted time to train, whatever that was. It is only fair to give access to flexibility to everyone.
Yeah.
And I agree. I understand why sometimes a mother with a sick child who has no other caretaker, there is no other option but to let her, you know, work from home. But everybody should have that ability. And I actually never understood companies that were inflexible about that, because I always saw what you saw. I say, if your people are happy, if they feel supported, if they feel lit up, they are going to perform for you. Exactly. They are going to show up for you. It shouldn't be that you have to work in one way.
No. And I think also, you know, to that, people will say, well, there's data that people don't perform as well and blah, blah, blah. And to that, I would say, is it an 80-20 split with the 80 being in favor of it? Like, what is that data? And, you know, as the time changes, the ability in the way that you view that data needs to change as well. It needs to be put in context.
Data coming out just this year that a lot of companies were saying they saw increase in productivity. Yeah, I think they did. I mean, I know Google said no offices. I know Twitter is saying, you know, no offices. I think this idea that we will be working these crazy hours is going away. And I know some of the large consulting firms like, an Ernst & Young is even trying to put practices to gatekeep hours for family time and basically disincentivize their partners for sending emails after hours. Because they're saying you cannot expect people, even though they're home, to be working 24/7 because we are seeing huge upticks in mental health challenges.
Yeah,
Stress.
I mean, if Europe can figure it out, guys, we can figure it out. If Paris can shut down for an entire month and still, make money and still be productive, like
still have
we can do it. Like we're
not running out of flour. I don't know. Something to be said about the European way.
Yeah.
I'm still mad we canceled our trip to France this summer. Okay. So let that go. Bringing up old wounds. I did learn to make macaroons in my kitchen though. Very, very fussy little food, but it was delicious.
That's great though.
They were yummy. Okay. So as we wrap up this episode, what can we leave people with as just 3 tips to bring about that spirit of resilience to their life?
Yeah. So number 1, I think you need to allow yourself the grace and space to fuck it up. I think, like, to be blunt, I think because our schedules were so crazy, because, the stakes feel so high, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to heighten the pressure you put on yourself. So, which is, again, easier said than done in some circumstances, because some of us, myself included, are our own worst enemies with that. But a lot of the stuff we're doing right now is brand new. It's only months old. It's not like we're accustomed to this level of integration and this level of chaos and this level of emotional strain. So grace and space, guys, give yourself the grace to fuck it up. Give yourself the space to recover from that. Is my first one. Go easy on yourself. And, number 2, I'm going to take it back to control. You need to understand what you can and cannot control within situations. And that is extremely scary sometimes and extremely difficult sometimes. But at the end of the day, it's going to save you the anxiety spiral that may be happening at 11 o'clock at night, as mine does sometimes. Number 3, actually, I'm going to give you 4, if that's okay. 3 is, keeping your boundaries up. There's a lot of noise. I just did a podcast episode on this yesterday on my show. There's a lot of noise and a lot of overwhelm out there. And for people who are already juggling unattainable, expectations and have a lot on their plate, the noise is just kind of salt in the wound. So you have to safeguard your boundaries. That means put time limits on your scrolling. That means, be aware of what your emotional state is before maybe you open up Fox News or CNN. It's tapping in and saying, is this a smart choice for me given where my head's at in the moment?
And I think you can still be an open-minded person, but silence things that bring you grief. I had to actually do that today. I have a very big, list of people on Facebook, and a lot of them are not my friends because they've come across my name through professional events. And there was a level of, I couldn't take it anymore. It was giving me anxiety. And I decided that I just needed to pause it. I just went down the list and I silenced things that were giving me angst, because you are who you surround yourself with. And if your energy is getting tacked by people that you feel like are infringing upon your boundaries or causing you stress, you don't need to read it. You don't need to watch it. You don't need to hear it.
You have a choice.
Silence it.
Yeah. And I think, again, if you have to show up as a leader in your household, if you have to show up as a leader in your company or wherever, or just a human being, for God's sakes, not even a leader, like whatever it is, if you have any expectation on yourself to show up, you need to bring as much of yourself as possible to the table. And the more you allow to seep in and the more you allow those boundaries to be kind of blown out of the water, the more you're going to spiral down, the less likely you are to bring your best self to things, and the less your teams are going to benefit and the less your families are going to benefit.
I did not realize we're at 5 to the hour, and I want to let people recap. If you want to follow Michelle more, if you want to listen to her podcast, how do you reach out to her?
Yeah, I know time flies. So you can find me at createhonesty.com is my website. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can search my name there, as well as Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter is at Create Honesty. And I also have a podcast, The Resilient Entrepreneur. If you want to hop over there and find me, you can do that as well.
And all of her contacts will be posted in the show notes. Michelle, it was wonderful to hear from you about leadership and resilience. And I wish you a relaxing weekend full of self-care. Thank you for an amazing episode and a lot of great conversation. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. And be sure to join us every Friday on Momentum Magnet, where we give you strategies to drive more momentum in your life and business. Follow us on iTunes and comment and give us reviews, because it helps us get more guests that you're interested in hearing from. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Momentum Magnet. We're here every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time to share inspiring comeback stories. We want to hear your reviews and love getting your subscriptions on iTunes and Spotify. For show notes and past episodes, visit MomentumMagnet.com. I'm Karen Morales, keynote speaker, writer, and founder and CEO of Marketing Magnet, a fast-growing marketing agency for purpose-driven companies. Whether you are a business needing an agency or if you are looking for weekly tips to get ahead, sign up at marketing-magnet.com to receive our weekly inspiration on getting more in your life and business.